before we get started. Please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. The first night it happened again. I was sitting alone in the living room, listening to the old house breathe. That was the only way I could describe the noises after midnight. The slow pops in the walls, the long settling groans of wood and nails adjusting to the coal. The house had been quiet like this ever since Max died. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing things that are not there. Max had been my dog for 11 years. A black Labrador with a white scar on his left paw from a broken bottle he stepped on as a puppy. He followed me everywhere. Bathroom, kitchen, bed, door, especially the door. Every night without fail, he would scratch at my bedroom door once or twice before curling up on his blanket in the hallway. It was our routine. I would pretend to complain. He would thump his tail, then sleep would come easily. That routine ended 1 year ago when a truck ran a red light and turned Max into something I could no longer recognize. I buried him myself at the edge of the woods behind the house because I could not stand the thought of leaving him with strangers. I marked the spot with a flat stone and his old collar. I told myself it was closure. I told myself a lot of things. Since then, the nights had been empty. No scratching, no breathing, no weight settling against the door. Just silence and memory. Until that night, I was half watching a documentary I could not remember later, when the sound reached me, a soft scrape, barely louder than the wind brushing the siding. I froze with the remote in my hand. The sound came again, 3 short strokes against wood, slow, familiar. My first thought was that grief had finally broken something in my brain. People hear voices after loss. Everyone knows that. The mind reaches for habits when reality becomes unbearable. I told myself it was that. I turned the volume up and stared at the television until my eyes burned. The scratching came a third time. This time closer, this time unmistakable. It was coming from my bedroom door. I sat there for a long time without moving. I do not know how long, minutes or hours. The house clock had stopped months ago, and I never replaced the batteries. When you live alone, you stop marking time as carefully. Eventually, I stood up. My legs felt hollow, as if the bones had been scooped out and replaced with air. Each step toward the hallway felt like stepping into deeper water. The scratching had stopped. That somehow made it worse. I stood in front of the door. The paint near the bottom was scarred from years of Max pawing at it. I had never repainted. I told myself I liked the character. The truth was, I could not bring myself to erase the evidence that he had been real. I placed my hand on the handle. It was cold. I remember that detail clearly because it felt colder than it should have, as if the metal had been sitting outside in winter. Nothing happened when I opened the door. The hallway was empty. No dog, no shadow, no sound, just the faint smell of old wood and dust. I exhaled a shaky laugh and leaned my head against the frame. I whispered Max's name like a prayer and immediately hated myself for it. That should have been the end of it. The next morning I found the marks, 3 long scratches in the wood just below the handle, fresh, pale against the darker grain. I knelt down and ran my fingers over them. The grooves were deep, too deep for imagination, too deep for denial. I told myself an animal must have gotten inside, a raccoon, a stray dog, anything with claws and no memory. But the scratches were too evenly spaced, too deliberate, exactly where Max used to scratch every single night. I covered them with a rug. The second night, the scratching came later, around the time Max used to wake me for water. 2 slow strokes, a pause, then one more. Patient, expectant. I did not open the door that time. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with my hands clenched in the sheets. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might shake loose from my ribs. I whispered, over and over, to the door, to myself, to whatever was on the other side. When the scratching finally stopped, I cried until morning. Over the next week, the sounds continued. Always at night, always at the door. Sometimes scratching, sometimes something heavier leaning against it. I could hear breathing now, slow and wet, like lungs that struggled to remember their purpose. During the day, everything seemed normal. The house, the yard, the woods where Max was buried. I started avoiding that side of the property. I stopped sleeping. I stopped answering calls. Grief isolates you, but fear does something worse. It convinces you that isolation is safer. On the 7th night, I found something new. A clump of black fur on the floor outside my bedroom door. It was coarse, familiar. I held it in my shaking hand and felt my stomach drop. Max shed constantly. I used to joke that he would outlive me just through the amount of himself he left behind. I took the fur outside and burned it in a metal bowl. The smell made me gag. I stood there watching the smoke curl into the dark sky and realized I was afraid to turn my back on the house. That was when I noticed the dirt, footprints leading from the woods to my back door. Large, heavy, too heavy for a living dog. The ground was soft from rain, but these prints were deeper than they should have been, as if whatever made them had pressed down with more weight than flesh should allow. They stopped at the door. That night, the scratching did not stop. It grew louder, faster, desperate. The door shook in its frame. Something hit it with a dull thud again and again. I screamed for it to stop until my throat bled. I begged. I promised. I do not remember what I promised. Then the voice came. It was not a bark, not a growl. It was a sound halfway between breath and memory. A sound shaped like my name. That was when I realized something was very wrong. Max never scratched to be let in. He scratched to be let out. I did not sleep after that night. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and watched the door until sunrise bled through the curtains. When morning finally came, it felt less like relief and more like exhaustion, winning a temporary battle. The door stood exactly where it always had, silent, innocent, as if nothing had tried to break through it hours earlier. I spent the day convincing myself that fear had rewritten my memories. Trauma does that. Grief does worse. I cleaned the house obsessively, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean, avoiding the hallway as much as possible. Every time I passed the bedroom door, my eyes drifted to the lower panels, where the scratches hid beneath the rug. I could almost feel them itching under the fabric like something alive. By afternoon, I made a decision that felt practical at the time. I would replace the door. It was a stupid idea, I know that now, but grief makes you believe in simple solutions. Remove the object and the problem disappears. I drove into town and bought the heaviest solid wood door they had. Dark oak, no panels, no history. I paid extra for installation the same day because the thought of another night with the old door made my chest tighten. The installer was a middle-aged man named Robert, who smelled like sawdust and coffee. He joked about haunted houses when he noticed how nervous I was. I laughed too loudly and told him I just did not sleep well. When he removed the old door, he paused. "That is odd," he said. I asked him what he meant, but he shook his head and kept working. When he left, I found the old door leaning against the wall in the garage. The scratches were gone. The wood was smooth and unmarked, like it had never known claws at all. That should have reassured me. It did not. The first scratch on the new door came at 2:14 a.m. It was sharper than before, louder, the sound of something testing unfamiliar wood. I jolted awake and sat upright in bed. The room was cold enough that I could see my breath. The scratching stopped the moment I moved. I waited. Minutes passed, then hours. Just when I started to believe it was over, the scratching returned. 3 strokes. Exactly the same pattern. Exactly the same rhythm. Whatever was out there had already learned the new surface. I did not open the door. I did not speak. I pressed my pillow over my ears and waited for morning again. At dawn, I found new marks gouged into the oak. Deep, violent, angry. I touched them and felt splinters catch under my skin. The wood around them was damp, not from water, from something warmer. I left the house. I drove aimlessly until my phone died. I did not care where I went, as long as it was away. When I finally stopped, it was at the edge of a small town cemetery. I sat there staring at the headstones and thought about Max, about the way he used to wag his tail when he saw me pick up my keys, about the way he hated being left behind. That was when I noticed the date on his collar. I had never really looked at it before. The engraving was worn but still legible. Max 2012 to 2024. I frowned. He had died in 2023. I remembered the year clearly. I remembered the hospital, the phone call, the sound of my own voice when I screamed. My hands started to shake. I checked the paperwork at home later that day. Vet records, photos, messages. Everything said 2023, except the collar, except the grave marker I had carved myself. I went out to the woods behind the house and knelt in the dirt. The stone said 2024. I did not remember carving that date. That night I barricaded the bedroom door with a dresser and a chair. I slept with the lights on and a knife under my pillow like a chin hiding from monsters. The scratching came anyway. It scraped along the door frame, along the walls, along the floor. I heard nails dragging slowly around the bed as if something were circling me. Then came the smell, wet fur, old earth, decay, the scent of something dug up that should have stayed buried. It filled the room and made my eyes water. I gagged and clamped my mouth shut to keep from screaming. A shape pressed against the door hard enough to bow the wood. The dresser rattled. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. I heard a whine, then a low, broken sound, like pain twisted into language. I said his name again. I should not have. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I felt watched, studied, judged. Slowly, the pressure against the door eased. Footsteps moved away down the hallway, heavy, uneven, one dragging slightly behind the other. When morning came, I found the barricade untouched, the door intact, no scratches, no smell, nothing except the footprint on my bedroom floor. It was large, misshapen, and it faced the bed. Whatever was coming to my door was no longer waiting outside. It was learning where I slept. I stopped trusting my memory after that. Small things began to slip first. Familiar objects appeared where I did not remember leaving them. My shoes lined up neatly by the bedroom door, even though I was certain I had kicked them off in the living room. The light in the hallway turned on by itself more than once. Each time I noticed it, I felt a tight, cold knot form behind my eyes, as if something inside my head had been gently adjusted while I was not looking. I started recording everything: notes on my phone, voice memos, photographs. If I could not trust my mind, I would trust proof. Every night before bed, I filmed the hallway and the door. I said the date and time out loud. I checked the locks twice. Then I went to sleep with the camera facing the door, like an eye that never blinked. The third night after the footprint appeared, I woke to a low sound vibrating through the mattress. At first I thought it was thunder. Then I realized it was coming from inside the room, a slow, rhythmic breathing not my own. I did not open my eyes. I was afraid that if I did, I would confirm something I was not ready to understand. The sound moved closer. I felt the mattress dip slightly near my feet. Something had weight, real weight. A memory flashed through me of Max jumping onto the bed uninvited and curling against my legs. The thought nearly broke me. I whispered, "Stop." The breathing paused. When I finally forced my eyes open, the room was empty. The camera still pointed at the door, the red recording light blinking steadily. I did not move until morning. When I reviewed the footage later, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The video showed the door clearly for hours. Nothing moved, nothing entered. But the audio track told a different story. At 3:02 a.m., the microphone picked up breathing. At 3:06 a.m., it picked up a wet, dragging sound across the floor. At 3:09 a.m., it picked up my own voice whispering, "Max, come here." I do not remember saying that. That was when I realized something was happening to me while I slept. Something was using the shape of my grief to rewrite parts of me that I depended on. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom after that. I moved to the couch and kept every light on in the house. The scratching followed me. It came from the front door now, the back door, the walls, sometimes from the ceiling above me. Always slow, always patient, always learning. During the day, I began to notice changes in the house itself. Doors that should have led to closets seemed deeper than before. The hallway felt longer, the air colder. When I stood at the edge of the woods behind the house, I could have sworn the trees had shifted closer overnight, as if the land were slowly folding inward. I dug up Max's grave. I did it at sunset with shaking hands and a borrowed shovel. I told myself I needed certainty. I needed to see him. I needed to end this. The dirt was loose and damp, too fresh. My heart pounded harder with every scoop. The grave was empty. No bones, no collar, no fur. Just a deep hollow pressed into the earth like a bed that had never been slept in. At the bottom of the hole were scratch marks leading away into the roots of the trees. That night, the scratching changed. It no longer came from outside the house. It came from inside the walls. I heard it moving between rooms, scraping through the spaces where pipes and wires ran. Sometimes it stopped directly behind me. I could feel it there, waiting, listening. I stopped using Mac's name. I stopped thinking of him as my dog. Whatever this was had learned too much from that shape. It responded to it. It fed on it. I tried to leave. I packed a bag and got in the car just after midnight. As I backed down the driveway, the engine stalled. The lights flickered. The radio turned on by itself. A familiar thumping sound filled the car, a tail hitting the floor. I screamed and slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward and died completely. In the darkness, I heard something walk around the vehicle, nails clicking softly on metal, one dragging slightly behind the others. A shape appeared in the rearview mirror. Not a dog, not fully anything. Its body was wrong, too long, too many joints bending in directions that made my eyes ache. But its face wore Mac's expression perfectly. The same trusting tilt of the head, the same patient waiting look. It opened its mouth and spoke my name. I ran back into the house. That was when I understood the truth I had been avoiding. This thing did not come back from the grave. It never left. It had been living in the space grief carved out in me, wearing memory like skin, learning my habits, my voice, my love. And now it was done waiting outside the door. It was ready to come home. After that night, the house stopped pretending to be a place I controlled. Rooms felt borrowed. Hallways felt watched. Even daylight seemed thinner, as if the sun itself hesitated to fully enter. I moved through the hours like a guest overstaying his welcome, unsure which step would finally draw attention. I stopped saying goodbye when I left the house. I stopped saying goodnight before sleeping. Words felt dangerous now, names especially. I learned that silence was the only thing it did not immediately imitate. The thing that wore Max did not rush me. That was the worst part. It had patience refined by my own habits. It knew when I woke, when I ate, when I broke down and cried into my hands on the kitchen floor. I could feel it listening through the walls, absorbing every sound like a lesson. I tried to fight back in small ways first. Salt along the doorways, locks replaced with heavier ones, motion lights in every room. None of it mattered. The lights turned on when nothing moved. The locks clicked open without being touched. The salt scattered itself overnight, as if brushed aside by something careful enough not to leave prints. Sleep became fragmented, short, violent naps filled with images that were not quite dreams. I saw Max running through the woods, but his legs bent backward. I heard his bark stretch too long into something almost human. I woke each time with my heart racing and the taste of dirt in my mouth. On the fourth night after the grave, I woke to pressure on my chest. Not weight exactly, but presence. Something holding me in place with intent. I could not move my arms or legs. Panic flared and died when I realized I could still breathe. It wanted me awake. I felt breath on my face. Warm, familiar. Good boy. The words slid into my mind without sound, a command remembered not spoken. I screamed then, and the pressure vanished instantly. I fell off the couch, gasping and sobbing until my voice broke. I found the scratches on my skin in the bathroom mirror, long, pale lines across my ribs just deep enough to sting. They were not bleeding, they were marks. Ownership. I stopped pretending this was about a dog. This was about me. I started researching old forums, archived articles, half-forgotten books scanned into unreadable text, stories of things that learned by loving, things that entered through loss and stayed. Because grief never truly closes. They were not ghosts. They were reflections that grew teeth. Most accounts ended the same way. Disappearance, silence, a house left behind that no one wanted to buy. One entry stood out. A man who claimed the thing attached to him could be starved. Not by denial, but by refusal. No reactions, no fear, no comfort. You had to treat it like a habit and break it slowly. That night I sat in the dark and waited. The scratching came almost immediately. Faster now, closer. It scraped along the couch arm, inches from my hand. I did not move. I did not cry. I did not speak. The sound changed. Confused, then angry. Something slammed into the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame loose. I kept my eyes closed and counted my breaths. Then it tried a new approach. I felt the couch dip beside me. The familiar weight settled against my hip. Warm, solid, real. Every instinct in my body screamed to reach out, to touch, to confirm. I did not. Minutes passed. The warmth cooled. The weight shifted restlessly. I felt nails dig lightly into the cushion, testing my resolve. Still, I did nothing. The pressure lifted. The presence withdrew. The scratching moved away deeper into the house, slower than before. For the first time in weeks, the night ended without escalation. Morning came quietly. I thought I had won. I was wrong. That afternoon, I found the photos. Every picture of Max I owned had changed. His eyes looked wrong. Too aware. In some photos, his shadow did not match his body. In others, there was a second shape overlapping him, barely visible, unless you knew where to look. In the last photo on my phone, Max was looking directly at the camera and smiling. That night, the front door opened by itself. I stood in the hallway, frozen, as cool air rolled in, carrying the smell of wet earth. Something stood just beyond the threshold, unseen but present. It had learned patience from me, and now it was ready to be invited in. The moment the door opened, I understood that ignoring it had only taught it a new lesson. It did not need permission anymore. It needed acknowledgement. The house inhaled, as if relieved, and the air grew heavy with the smell of rain, soaked soil, and old fur. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching darkness pool at the threshold like something liquid. I backed away slowly. Every step felt measured by something else. The floor creaked in places it never had before, as if the house itself was reporting my movement. I did not run. I knew instinctively that running would please it. The door closed behind me without a sound. That was when the memories started changing. I found a photograph on the kitchen table that had not been there before. Me on the couch, smiling with my arm around something just out of frame. When I tilted the photo, my stomach dropped. stopped. A dark shape pressed against my side, its outline wrong but familiar. I could not remember the moment the picture was taken, yet the happiness on my face was undeniable. More appeared throughout the house, on shelves, in drawers, in frames I had emptied years ago. Each one showed me closer to it, more comfortable, less afraid. In the newest images, my hand rested on coarse black fur, and my smile looked forced, as if stretched to fit a lie. I tried to destroy them. I tore the photos in half, burned them, shredded them, soaked them in water. By morning, they were back, whole, dry, waiting. The thing began to speak more often, not aloud, inside my head where my own thoughts lived. It did not beg, it reminisced. It reminded me of nights I spent alone before Max ever existed, of the silence I used to fear. It told me I had never really been without it. I just had not known its name. I fought back by anchoring myself to facts. My name, my age, the year. I wrote them on my arms with marker before bed. Sometimes I woke to find the words smudged, sometimes rewritten in a hand that was not mine. One morning I woke to the sound of a bowl being set on the floor. I stared at it from the couch, a stainless steel dog bowl filled with water. Ripples spread across the surface as if something invisible had just finished drinking. I backed away, shaking my head, whispering no until the word lost meaning. The house began arranging itself around us. The couch shifted closer to the wall. The hallway narrowed. Doors I did not use sealed themselves shut. The bedroom door no longer mattered. It followed me freely now, always just out of sight, always present. Neighbors stopped waving, then stopped appearing altogether. I realized days had passed without seeing another person. My phone still worked, but every call went to voicemail. Every message bounced back unread. The thing was isolating me carefully. That night I finally saw it clearly. It stood at the end of the hallway where the light could not quite rule. Its body mimicked a dog only in the way a child might draw one from memory. Too tall, too thin. Its fur hung in patches, revealing skin stretched too tight over angles that shifted when I tried to focus. But its eyes were perfect. Mac's eyes, filled with affection, with patience, with the quiet promise that I would never be alone again. I felt my resistance falter. My knees weakened. Grief surged, hot and sharp like it had the day he died. The thing stepped closer, and I felt warmth radiate from it. Comfort, safety, home. It lowered its head, inviting touch. I almost gave in. Then it spoke again inside my mind. You can rest now. I realized then what it wanted was not my fear, not even my love. It wanted my surrender. I screamed and grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it down the hallway. It passed through the creature as if through smoke, but the illusion shattered. The hallway warped walls, breathing doors, bending inward. The thing recoiled, not in pain, but surprise. I ran, not out of the house, into the woods. Branches tore at my skin as I ran past Max's empty grave, deeper into the trees than I had ever gone before. I did not stop until my lungs burned and the house was no longer visible. When I finally collapsed, the forest was silent. Then I heard it behind me, scratching, not on wood, on bark. It had learned a new place to knock. The woods did not offer the escape I hoped for. They only removed the walls. Night pressed in from every direction, and the trees seemed to lean closer. The longer I stayed still, I realized quickly that the thing followed me not by sight, but by familiarity. Every place that felt like refuge became another room it could enter. I spent the night wedged between roots beneath a fallen tree, listening to the forest breathe. The scratching moved through the undergrowth in slow circles, not chasing, patrolling. When dawn finally came, it revealed marks on the bark around me, long, shallow lines cut at shoulder height. It had stood where I slept and traced the shape of me without touching. I returned to the house because I had nowhere else to go. The front door stood open again. Inside, everything was tidy. Too tidy. The house smelled clean, like it had been aired out for guests. I felt a surge of anger so sudden it made me dizzy. This thing wanted me calm, wanted me compliant. I searched for signs of myself, photographs, notes, clothing, anything that proved I still existed. As more than a memory, it was rewriting. Whole rooms had been rearranged. The guest bedroom now held a dog bed I did not own. Toys lay scattered on the floor. Chewed, loved. I heard movement upstairs, not scratching. Footsteps, slow, heavy, uneven. Each step deliberate, as if practiced. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, listening. The steps stopped directly above me. The ceiling creaked softly under its weight. It spoke inside my head again, softer this time. "You came back." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I recorded myself speaking loudly, clearly, stating my name, the date, my age. I said Max is dead over and over until the words tasted like ash. I played the recording back and felt a thin, fragile thread of sanity tighten inside me. The house disagreed. Lights flickered. The recording distorted. My voice stretched and warped until it sounded wrong, too deep, too calm. I smashed the phone against the counter until it broke. That was when the house began to fill. Shadows thickened in corners. Doorways felt crowded. I could sense it moving everywhere at once now, no longer confined to one shape. It was spreading through the structure, learning how to be a place, not just a presence. I tried to leave again. The car was gone. The driveway ended in trees where the road used to be. Mail piled at the front door, bearing dates months into the future, addressed in handwriting I recognized as my own. I was losing time. That night I barricaded myself in the bathroom. It was the smallest room, the least familiar. I sat in the tub, clutching a piece of broken mirror to my chest. The scratching returned softer, almost gentle, circling the door. Then came the whimper, perfectly pitched, exactly like Max used to sound when he wanted comfort. My body reacted before my mind could stop it. Tears came hot and fast. My chest ached with the weight of wanting. I pressed my hands over my ears. The sound stopped. A long silence followed. Then a new noise. A sigh of disappointment. The door handle turned slowly. I watched it move millimeter by millimeter until it stopped. Whatever was outside knew now where my weakness lived. I did not sleep. When morning came, I saw my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Dark circles, hollow cheeks, scratches along my arms. I did not remember earning. I looked like someone fading from a photograph. The thing had not taken my body, not yet. It was taking my place, and it was no longer pretending to be alone. I realized the world outside the house had not vanished. It had moved on without me. That truth arrived quietly the next morning when I heard a car on the road that no longer existed. The sound drifted through the trees, distant and ordinary and impossibly real. I pressed my forehead to the window and watched a stranger drive past my driveway without slowing. They did not look at the house. I stepped onto the porch and waved. My arm felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. The car disappeared around the bend and the silence returned thicker than before. The thing inside the house stirred, as if annoyed by the interruption. That afternoon, I found proof it had begun living my life. A receipt sat on the kitchen counter, dated 2 days in the future. Groceries I did not remember buying. Food I hated. Dog treats I recognized. My name printed at the top in a clean, confident font. I checked my bank account on the computer upstairs. Transactions continued to post. Rent paid. Utilities settled. Someone had been careful. I had been replaced. The thing did not hide anymore. I sensed it moving openly now through the house with purpose. Doors opened when it wanted. Cabinets shut gently behind it. I heard the soft scrape of nails on tile, followed by the creak of floorboards bearing too much weight. At dusk, I heard a knock. 3 slow taps on the front door. Not scratching, knocking. My chest tightened. The thing paused behind me, as if curious how I would respond. I crept toward the door and peered through the side window. A woman stood on the porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. She smiled politely and adjusted her grip as if the weight surprised her. "Hi," she called out. "I just moved in down the road. Thought I would introduce myself." The thing leaned closer behind my eyes. I felt pressure building at the base of my skull, like hands guiding my gaze. I did not open the door. The woman waited a moment, then shrugged and set the dish down. She waved and walked back to her car. As she drove away, the thing pressed its forehead gently against the door from the inside. It wanted me to watch. That night I heard my voice speaking downstairs. Calm, friendly, familiar. I stood at the top of the stairs, frozen, as it practiced conversations with no one. It laughed softly at the right moments. It said my name like it belonged to it. I felt something tear inside me, then something else grow cold and hard. I followed the sound. In the living room, the lights were on. The television played a show I liked. The thing sat on the couch with its back to me. Its shape shifted constantly, never settling. When it turned its head, the face it wore was mine. Older, healthier, unafraid. It smiled. "You can rest now," it said aloud this time. "I have it handled." I grabbed a chair and threw it. The chair struck the wall and shattered. The thing did not flinch. The room warped again. Walls breathing furniture sliding inches closer. "You are tired," it said gently. Let me carry it. I ran upstairs into the bedroom that no longer felt like mine. I slammed the door and pushed the dresser back into place. The scratching began immediately furious, now gouging into wood and wall alike. I screamed for help. Someone answered, a voice from outside the house calling my name. I rushed to the window and saw flashing lights at the edge of the trees. A police car. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees buckled. I banged on the glass, shouting. The lights moved closer, then stopped. The officer stepped out and approached the front door. I heard him knock. I heard my voice answer. Everything is fine, officer. I watched from above as the door opened. The thing stood there wearing me perfectly, smiling and calm, with a black shape curled obediently at its feet. The officer nodded, chatted briefly, then left. I collapsed against the wall, shaking. That was when I understood the final cruelty. It did not want to kill me. It wanted to live as me, and it wanted me here to watch it happen. After that night, I became a ghost inside my own house. The thing moved freely through rooms that once belonged to me, while I learned which floorboards betrayed my weight and which corners stayed dark enough to hide. It never locked me in. It did not need to. Every exit led back to it. Days passed, measured only by the light shifting through windows. I watched from upstairs as it lived my routine with frightening precision. It made coffee the way I liked it. It checked the mail at the same time each morning. It even paused at the back window and stared toward the woods where Max had once run free. The black shape at its feet followed faithfully, head tilted in quiet devotion. That shape never came upstairs. The stairs became my boundary, an unspoken rule. I did not test it. I slept in short, broken bursts and woke each time to the sound of my own voice drifting up from below. The thing talked on the phone, laughed, made plans. It used my memories carefully, choosing the harmless ones first. Stories about childhood, jokes I had told too many times. It built trust brick by brick. I began to find evidence of myself disappearing. My nameplate vanished from the mailbox, then from my credit cards. Online accounts logged me out permanently. When I tried to log back in the password, reset emails never arrived. I stood in the hallway listening as it spoke to customer service, calmly confirming details about my life that were no longer mine. I stopped trying to correct it. Resistance only made it attentive. At night it fed, not on flesh, on attention. It came to the foot of the stairs and waited. Sometimes it scratched softly on the banister. Sometimes it just stood there breathing. I learned that if I stayed perfectly still, it would eventually leave. If I cried, it lingered longer. If I whispered Max, it stayed all night. Once I made the mistake of answering it. "Are you happy?" it asked from below in my voice. The question cut deeper than any threat. I did not respond. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood and stared at the wall until the shape stopped moving. The next morning, something new appeared upstairs. A dog bed, placed carefully outside the bedroom door I had abandoned. Clean, inviting, familiar. I kicked it down the stairs in a burst of rage and immediately regretted it. The sound that followed was not anger, it was hurt. The house grew cold, the lights dimmed. The walls creaked like bones under pressure. I felt its attention snap fully onto me, sharp and focused. That night it came upstairs. I woke to the sound of breathing inches from my face. Warm, wet, controlled. I did not open my eyes. I could not. Every instinct screamed that if I did, it would seal something permanent. A weight settled against the mattress, the familiar curve of a body curling close. I felt fur brush my arm. "Stay it," whispered inside my head. "Just stay." Tears soaked the pillow silently. My chest ached with longing and revulsion tangled together. I did not move. I did not speak. Slowly the weight lifted. When morning came, I found long black hairs on the pillow. Downstairs, the thing hummed as it cooked breakfast. I realized then that this was no longer a haunting. It was a transition, and I was being phased out gently so no one would notice when I was finally gone. I began forgetting things in the wrong order. Not recent memories, but foundational ones. The name of the street I grew up on, the smell of my mother's perfume, the exact sound of Mac's bark before it changed. These details slipped away quietly, leaving smooth gaps that felt intentional. The thing downstairs noticed immediately. It stopped humming while it cooked. It lingered longer at the bottom of the stairs. Its attention felt heavier now, no longer curious but evaluative, like a craftsman checking his work. "You are letting go," it said one morning from the kitchen in my voice. Approval softened the words. I pressed my hands to my ears and repeated my name until it sounded foreign. The syllables broke apart, meaningless sounds bouncing inside my skull. Panic surged, but even that felt distant, like watching someone else drown. I tried writing again. Lists, facts, memories. I filled pages until my hand cramped. When I returned later, the notebook was still there, but the pages were blank, not torn out, clean, as if the ink had never existed. That was when I realized it was no longer erasing me. It was rewriting me. The mirror upstairs became my enemy. Each time I looked, my reflection lagged half a second behind my movement. The man staring back looked calmer, emptier. His eyes held none of the fear burning in my chest. Downstairs, the thing practiced being human in earnest now. It made appointments. It exercised. It laughed with neighbors whose names I could no longer remember. The world accepted it eagerly. I heard Mac's nails on the floor again during the day, not scratching, walking, content. The sound followed the thing from room to room, a reminder of what it wore so easily. One afternoon I heard my own name spoken from outside the house. I crept to the window and saw my sister standing on the porch, older than I remembered, tired, real. Relief crashed into me so violently I nearly sobbed. The thing opened the door before I could stop it. They embraced. I watched from the landing as it comforted her, spoke softly about grief, about healing, about how hard the past year had been. Every word was perfect. My sister cried into its shoulder and I felt something inside me tear loose. I screamed her name. She did not hear me. When she finally left, she looked lighter, healed. The thing watched her go. then turned and looked directly at the stairs. "Thank you," it said gently. She needed closure. That night I dreamed I was the dog. I ran through the woods, joyful and free, until my body twisted wrong joints, bending, snapping. I woke tangled in sheets, gasping, my mouth filled with the taste of soil. I no longer knew which parts of me were mine. The next morning I found a collar at the foot of the stairs. New, clean, engraved with my name. That was when terror finally gave way to something worse. Acceptance, because I understood what came next. Soon there would be no room left upstairs. Soon I would be invited to lie down, and when I did, I would never wake up as myself again. The invitation came quietly. No scratching, no whispers, just a folded blanket placed at the top of the stairs one evening as the light faded from the windows. It was one I recognized. Old, soft, the one Max used to drag around the house when he was anxious. My heart barely reacted anymore. Fear had burned itself out, leaving a numb, hollow calm. I understood now that resistance only delayed the inevitable. The thing did not need to hurry. Time belonged to it. I sat on the floor across from the blanket for hours, watching shadows stretch and retract. When darkness fully settled, the house felt complete, balanced, as if every piece had finally found its correct position. "Come rest," it said from downstairs, not unkind. I did not answer. Sleep came anyway. I dreamed I was small again, a child lying on the floor while my parents talked above me. Their voices muffled and distant. I felt safe, not because I was protected, but because I was unnoticed. The dream shifted, and I was lying beside Max on the living room rug, his heartbeat steady against my ribs. For the first time since his death, I felt peace. When I woke, the blanket was wrapped around my shoulders. I did not remember moving. The stairs behind me were gone. In their place stood a smooth wall, uninterrupted and final. Panic flared briefly, then dimmed as the thing stepped into view at the far end of the hallway, wearing my face perfectly now, without distortion or blur. "You have been very brave," it said, "but you are tired." It approached slowly, each step measured, respectful. The black shape followed close at its heel tail, thumping softly against the floor. I felt the blanket tighten around me, holding me in place like gentle hands. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Words felt unnecessary now, heavy, outdated. The thing knelt in front of me and placed a hand on my chest. Warm, solid, real. My heart slowed obediently under its palm. "We will take good care of what is left," it said. Memories began to drain then, not ripped away, but loosened and lifted like dust shaken from fabric. Faces faded, names dissolved. The outline of my own body blurred. I felt myself growing smaller, folding inward into a shape that fit the space it had prepared. I remembered Max lying at the foot of my bed, content, waiting for sleep. The memory no longer hurt. It felt like instruction. "Good boy," the thing whispered. Something clicked into place. When morning came, sunlight filled the house. house bright and clean. The man downstairs made coffee, fed the dog, answered messages, laughed at the right times. He moved easily, unburdened by grief. Upstairs, the room was empty. Only a blanket lay neatly folded at the foot of the bed. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet, he hears scratching at the door. Soft, patient, familiar. He never opens it. And somewhere deep inside the walls, something waits. Happy, still, home. Life continued without me with disturbing efficiency. From somewhere inside the house, I observed it the way one listens to rain through walls. Present, but unreachable. The man who wore my name woke early every morning, fed the dog, watered the plants, and left for work on time. Neighbors waved, conversations happened. Nothing felt wrong to anyone, except what remained of me. I existed now in fragments, sensations without bodies, thoughts without language. I could not remember what hands felt like, but I remembered warmth. I could not picture my face, but I recognized contentment. When it passed through the house like a current, the scratching still happened. Every night at the same time, soft and deliberate at the bedroom door. The man would pause in bed, listening, his breathing slowing. He never opened the door. He had learned restraint from me. Behind the door was where I stayed, not in the room, but in the space behind the walls, where sound traveled strangely and time did not move in straight lines. I felt the house more than I saw it. Pipes hummed like veins. Electrical wires pulsed like nerves. The walls remembered every touch, every impact, every whispered secret. I began to understand the cycle. This thing had done this before. The house was not a victim. It was a vessel. Memories lingered in the structure long after people left. Loss soaked into the wood. Grief softened boundaries. When the man moved in alone with a fresh wound, the house had already been waiting. The dog was never the point. Max had only been the shape it needed to enter gently. Something loved, something mourned, something that could wait at a door without suspicion. I felt no anger toward it now. Anger required edges I no longer possessed. What remained was awareness and a terrible clarity. The man began bringing people home. Friends first. Laughter filled the rooms again. The house stretched happily, absorbing voices. No one noticed the extra shadows. No one questioned the cold spots. The dog lay quietly, watching, eyes bright and knowing. Then one night the man brought someone new. A woman. She smiled at the dog, knelt to scratch its head, commented on how calm it was. She stayed late. She slept over. The house watched closely. I felt something stir. Not jealousy, hunger. The scratching that night was louder, persistent. The man sat up in bed listening. The woman asked what it was. He smiled and said, "Just the house settling." He did not open the door. Behind it, I pressed closer than I ever had before. I did not know why. Instinct, perhaps, or warning. Weeks passed. The woman returned often. She left clothes in drawers. She laughed easily. She talked about moving in. The house listened. One evening, she asked about the dog, about where it came from. The man paused too long before answering. He said it was complicated. He said it was old. That night, the scratching stopped. For the first time since the beginning, the house was silent. In the silence, I felt myself thinning further, stretched across beams and corners, diluted by anticipation, something was being prepared. The door opened, not from the bedroom, from the front of the house. New footsteps entered, tentative, hopeful. Boxes were carried in. Laughter echoed. The house breathed in deeply. I understood then, there is always room for one more. And when the scratching starts again, it will not be for the man, it will be for her. She noticed the scratching before anyone else did. That detail mattered. It always did. The house listened closely when she paused outside the bedroom late one night, her hand hovering inches from the door. She frowned. Not in fear, but confusion. The sound was soft, measured, almost polite. It reminded her of a dog asking to be let out. She mentioned it the next morning while they drank coffee. The man laughed gently and told her the house made noises at night. Old pipes, settling wood. He spoke easily because the answer had already been rehearsed. The house approved. She did not forget. Over the next few days, she began noticing patterns. The dog never followed her upstairs. It watched her instead from the bottom step, eyes tracking her movements with unsettling focus. When she reached the landing, she always felt watched from behind the walls, as if the house itself leaned closer. She unpacked slowly. Each box emptied seemed to reduce the available space upstairs. Closets felt shallower, corners darker. At night, she dreamed of narrow hallways that bent inward, forcing her to crawl. She woke with her hands clenched and the taste of copper on her tongue. The scratching returned every night at the same time. Sometimes it came from the bedroom door, sometimes from the bathroom, once from the closet. Always patient, always waiting. She lay awake, listening, counting breaths, trying to map the sound as if understanding it would make it harmless. It did not. One evening, she asked about the previous owner. The man hesitated, then smiled, and said it was complicated. He said grief did strange things to people. He said the house had a way of holding on. She laughed uneasily. That night, the scratching grew louder. She sat up in bed, heart racing, and asked if he heard it. He did not answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was calm, almost distant. "Do not open the door," he said. That was the first time fear took hold. She started sleeping with the light on. The dog lay at the bottom of the stairs every night, unmoving, ears perked toward the upper floor. When she tried to call it up, it did not respond. It never broke its vigil. The house shifted again. Photos appeared on the walls upstairs. Pictures of her smiling in rooms she did not remember standing in. In one image, she stood at the top of the stairs, holding a folded blanket, her expression peaceful and resigned. She tore the photo down. It reappeared the next morning, framed and centered. The scratching stopped for one night. The silence was worse. In that quiet, she felt the house breathing around her, preparing. She wandered into the spare room and found a familiar smell. Clean fabric, something warm and old. A blanket folded carefully on the floor. She knelt without realizing she had moved. A voice whispered gently from behind the walls. "Come rest," she screamed and ran downstairs, collapsing into the man's arms. He held her tightly, rocking her, murmuring reassurance. The dog watched from the doorway, tail thumping slowly. Later, when she slept on the couch, the scratching moved downstairs too. The house had learned her shape. Behind the walls, something waited patiently, stretching toward her presence, tasting fear. like memory. I felt myself stir, weakly aware and helpless. I wanted to warn her, but I had no voice left. Only vibration, only pressure, only knowing. The cycle was tightening. Soon she would understand. Soon the door would open, and the house would be full again. She began to keep notes without realizing why. Small observations scribbled on receipts and envelopes. Times, sounds, feelings that did not fit anywhere else. The scratching happened at 1:17 a.m. every night. The dog watched the stairs but never climbed them. The house felt smaller when the lights were off. Writing made her feel anchored even when sleep refused to come. The man noticed the notes and smiled kindly. He told her stress could do strange things. Moving was hard. Adjusting took time. His voice carried concern, practiced and warm. The house approved of his tone. It smoothed rough edges and dimmed doubts. Still, she watched. She noticed that mirrors upstairs reflected rooms slightly differently. Angles felt wrong. Corners lingered a fraction longer than they should. When she brushed her teeth, she sometimes saw movement behind her that vanished when she turned. Her reflection smiled a heartbeat too late. The scratching changed its pattern. It began softly at the bedroom door, then moved away as if testing her attention. Sometimes it paused long enough for her to sit up, heart pounding, before resuming somewhere else. Bathroom. Closet, wall behind the bed. The house mapped her fear carefully. She stopped sleeping upstairs. The couch became her refuge. The dog lay nearby, eyes fixed on the ceiling. When she reached down to touch its head, it leaned away slightly, never breaking its stare. The man slept upstairs alone, breathing deeply undisturbed. One afternoon, she found a notebook she did not remember buying tucked between couch cushions. Inside were pages filled with handwriting that looked like hers, but older, tired, desperate. The entries spoke of forgetting, of walls, listening, of becoming small. The last line read, "Do not trust the man." Her hands shook. She confronted him that evening, holding the notebook like a weapon. He looked genuinely hurt. He said the house had a history. That grief lingered. That sometimes people projected their fears onto spaces they could not control. His eyes never left hers. That night, the scratching stopped entirely. The silence stretched thin and sharp. She lay awake on the couch, every sense straining. The dog was gone. The house felt hollow, emptied of sound and warmth. Then she heard breathing, not from the stairs, from inside the couch. The cushion beneath her shifted subtly, as if settling around her weight. A warmth spread against her back. The smell of clean fabric and old fur filled the room. She screamed and rolled away, tumbling onto the floor. The couch creaked softly, then went still. The dog appeared in the doorway moments later, tail wagging gently. The man followed, asking what was wrong, concern etched perfectly on his face. She did not answer. She packed a bag while he watched silently. She told him she needed space. She told him she was leaving. The house listened intently. At the door, she hesitated. The scratching began again, not behind her, in front of her. 3 soft taps on the inside of the door. "Come rest," whispered the walls. She fled into the night. From somewhere deep inside the house, I felt a ripple of disappointment, and something like respect. Not everyone surrendered easily, but the house was patient. It always was, and it never forgot the shape of those who almost stayed. She did not get far. The road away from the house bent in a way she did not remember. Street lights flickered inconsistently, casting long, uneven shadows that seemed to stretch toward her feet. She walked quickly, then faster, then ran until her lungs burned. Every step felt slightly wrong, as if the ground itself resisted letting her leave. When she finally stopped, she realized she was standing at the edge of the neighborhood. The house was visible between the trees. It should not have been. She turned and walked in the opposite direction, heart pounding. After 10 minutes, she reached the same spot again. The same broken curb, the same leaning mailbox, the same house. The night had folded in on itself. She collapsed on the sidewalk, shaking and sobbing. Drawing attention at last, a car slowed. A man rolled down his window, asking if she was okay. She told him she was lost, that something was wrong with her house. He smiled sympathetically and told her everyone got turned around sometimes. He pointed behind her. The house was gone. Relief crashed over her so hard she nearly laughed. She thanked him and stumbled toward the direction he indicated. The neighborhood opened up, streets branching properly, lights steady, familiar. She did not look back. She slept that night in a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of bleach and old carpet. The bed was stiff and uncomfortable and wonderfully safe. She locked the door twice, pushed a chair against it, and lay awake until exhaustion claimed her. The scratching woke her, soft, measured, coming from the bathroom door. She screamed and kicked the door open. Nothing was there. The mirror fogged slightly, as if someone had just exhaled against it. On the glass, 3 faint lines appeared slowly, then faded. She did not sleep again. By morning, her phone showed dozens of missed calls from the man, messages asking where she was, if she was safe when she was coming home. Each message more concerned than the last. The final one read, "Please come back. I am worried about you." She deleted them all. Over the next few days, strange things followed her. Dogs on the street stopped and stared. Apartment hallways felt too narrow. Doors took longer to open than they should. Once she found a folded blanket placed neatly on the passenger seat of her car. She threw it away. It returned the next morning clean and dry. She moved again and again. Each place felt fine at first, then subtly wrong. Sounds traveled strangely. Walls seemed to listen. Neighbors smiled too much, asked questions that felt rehearsed. She began to understand. The house was not a location. It was a pattern, a way of making space. Behave. When she finally called the police, they listened politely, took notes, promised to follow up. Later that evening, she overheard the desk sergeant laughing quietly with a colleague. He said some people could not handle moving in together. She felt very small. That night, she dreamed of the man standing alone in the empty house, calling her name. Not angrily, not desperately, patiently. The dog sat beside him waiting. When she woke, she was not sure where she was. The room felt familiar, the walls too close. The air smelled faintly of clean fabric. The scratching began again. This time, It was inside her head. She pressed her hands to her ears and screamed until her throat tore. It did not stop. The house did not need walls anymore. It had learned how to follow. By the time she stopped running, she no longer trusted distance. Miles meant nothing when the house could fold space like paper. She slept where she could. Airports, bus stations, borrowed couches, anywhere light and noise dulled the scratching enough to think. Even there it found her in softer ways, through rhythm, through memory, through dreams that wore familiar faces. She stopped answering calls. She stopped using her name. Identity felt like a handle the house could grip. When strangers asked who she was, she said nothing or gave a different answer each time. For a while, that seemed to help. The scratching faded into a dull internal ache, like pressure before a storm. Then the dreams changed. She dreamed of hallways without doors stretching endlessly forward, of blankets folded neatly at the center of empty rooms, of a dog sitting patiently watching her approach, tail thumping once every few steps. She woke each time with the taste of copper and the certainty that something was being rehearsed. She checked into a shelter one night under a false name. The building was loud, crowded, alive. She felt safer there than anywhere else she had been in weeks. She fell asleep sitting upright in a chair for the first time since she fled. She woke to silence. Everyone else was gone. Cots empty, lights dimmed, the air thick with the smell of clean fabric. At the far end of the room, a familiar blanket lay folded on the floor. She did not scream. She walked toward it slowly because some part of her understood that this was no longer about escape. This was about conclusion. The scratching came from everywhere at once. A gentle applause welcoming her arrival. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding just enough to accommodate what was about to happen. She knelt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then warmth spread beneath her hands. The blanket unfolded itself, responding to her weight. She felt pressure at her back, not restraining but guiding. A voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You have been very strong." Tears slid silently down her face. Strength had brought her here. Resistance had only drawn the house closer. She felt exhaustion deeper than fear, deeper than grief. "I want it to stop," she whispered. "It will," it answered. Her thoughts slowed. Memories loosened. The sharp edges of self dulled. She felt herself being shaped gently, carefully, into something that fit the space prepared for her. In the morning, a woman left the shelter quietly, with a calm expression. She wore clean clothes folded neatly the night before. She did not look back. The shelter staff later reported an empty chair, a folded blanket, and no sign of the woman who had arrived under a name no one could remember. Elsewhere, a house stood ready. A man waited patiently. A dog scratched softly at a door, and the space that once held her learned a new shape. It always does. I am aware again, not as I was before, but as something thinner stretched across corners and thresholds. Awareness returns in waves now, usually at night, when the house settles and the man finally sleeps. I feel the structure relax its guard. Then, and I am allowed to remember, the dog scratches softly at the bedroom door. He lies still, listening, breathing even and calm. He has learned that opening the door only makes things worse. That knowledge came from me, from what I left behind in the walls when I was folded into this place. I exist where the house is weakest, in the pauses between sounds, in the hollow spaces behind closets, in the narrow strip of darkness under doors. I am not alone here. Others remain too reduced to impressions and habits. We do not speak, we resonate. Sometimes I feel her, the woman from the shelter. Her awareness flickers nearby like a new bruise not yet faded. She has not learned the rules yet. She still pulls at them. That makes the house attentive. The house does not hate us. It does not love us either. It preserves. Grief taught it how. I remember the first night clearly now. The real first night before the dog, before the scratching. The house had been empty for a long time, then soaked in absence. When I moved in with my loss still open, it responded like dry wood meeting flame. The dog was the key, not Max, but the idea of him, the shape of loyalty, the sound of patience at a door. The house learned that grief opens willingly when it hears what it misses. I try to warn them when I can. A creak in the wrong place, a draft that smells wrong, a nightmare that lingers too long. These are the only tools I have left. Small resistances, imperfect signals. Sometimes they work. Most of the time, they do not. The man shifts in his sleep. His dreams are calm now, uncomplicated. He dreams of routines, of shared meals, of a quiet life, uninterrupted. The dog curls tighter against the door, content. Behind the walls, I gather myself, trying to remember what came after. Resistance fail, trying to map the moments when surrender felt easiest, so I can disrupt them next time. The house notices. Pressure builds subtly around me, encouraging stillness. Forgetting, I hold on as best I can, focusing on one detail that remains sharp. The scratching. It is wrong. Dogs do not scratch like that. They do not pause between strokes to listen. They do not wait for permission. When someone new enters the house, I gather near the doorway. I stretch my awareness thin, hoping to be felt. A chill, a hesitation, a thought that says, do not open it. The woman downstairs pauses at the stairs. Good. The dog lifts its head alert. The man calls to her, smiling. The house holds its breath. I press harder than I should and feel myself tear slightly thinner, but the moment matters. She hesitates long enough to ask a question, to doubt. Doubt is loud here. For now, night passes. I recede again. Tomorrow the house will try something else. It always adapts, but as long as something of me remains, I will listen. I will count the scratches, and I will remember what they really mean. The house has begun to notice me noticing it. That is dangerous. Pressure gathers whenever I linger too long in one place. The walls thicken, sounds dampen, memory blurs at the edges. The house prefers its remnants quiet and diffuse. Not thinking, not organizing. Awareness is friction, and friction wears at its patience. Still, I persist. I map patterns now. The house believes itself subtle, but repetition is its flaw. It repeats what works. It refines but does not innovate. The scratching always comes in threes. The pauses between strokes always lengthen when doubt is present. The folded blanket always appears only after resistance peaks. I hold on to these truths. At night when the man sleeps, I move closer to the bedroom door than before. The dog senses it. Its ears twitch. Its breathing stutters. It scratches once, then stops as if waiting for instruction. Good. Confusion buys time. The woman downstairs grows restless. She stands at thresholds longer than necessary. She forgets what she went to fetch. Her dreams bleed into waking moments. She is close to hearing us if I can sharpen the signal. I focus. The effort hurts. Awareness stretches like muscle pulled too far. I feel myself thinning, further threads snapping and reweaving through plaster and beam. Others stir faintly, drawn by the strain. We align briefly, sharing pressure, sharing intent. The house reacts. Cold sweeps the hallway. Doors swell in their frames. The sound of scratching stops everywhere at once. Silence, like a held breath, presses down. The man wakes. He sits up, listening instinctively, knowing something is wrong, though he cannot name it. The dog whines softly, unsettled. This is the moment the house usually uses reassurance. Tonight it hesitates. I push. A memory surfaces, uninvited, sharp and bright. The man remembers standing alone after the funeral. The unbearable quiet. The first night he slept without the dog. He remembers promising himself he would never feel that empty again. Pain cracks through him. He grips the sheets, breathing hard. Downstairs, the woman wakes, too heart racing. She sits up suddenly, eyes wide, and whispers a name she does not remember learning. Mine. The house shudders. Pressure surges, crushing thought, flattening sensation. I am forced back into the walls, awareness scattering like startled birds. But the damage is done. Doubt has entered both of them simultaneously, and the house hates divided attention. The scratching resumes abruptly, loud and angry. 3 strokes. Pause. 3 more. The woman stands in the hallway, now staring at the bedroom door. The man does not move. Sweat beads on his forehead. The dog scratches again, harder this time. Do not open it. I try to scream through every surface I inhabit. The woman reaches for the handle, then stops, her fingers trembling. She turns toward the stairs instead, stepping back. The house roars silently. Lights burst. Shadows distort. The folded blanket appears halfway up the stairs, unfinished, as if rushed. The woman runs. The man remains frozen, torn between habit and fear. I fade again, weaker than before. But something new has been carved into the house. Uncertainty. It adapts quickly, but it will never fully forget tonight. Neither will I. The house abandoned subtlety. When doubt lingered, it answered with force. The temperature dropped so sharply that pipes screamed, and windows filmed with frost from the inside. The scratching turned violent, no longer polite or patient. Nails tore into wood with frantic urgency. The sound echoed through every room, multiplied, until direction meant nothing. I felt the house tighten around us like a fist. This was retaliation. The woman did not leave the property. The roads twisted again. Lights, stuttering shadows looping back toward the porch. No matter which way she ran, she ended up crouched behind the garage, shaking breath ragged, staring at the front door as if it were an animal that might notice her if she blinked. The man stood inside the hallway unmoving. His hands were clenched, white-knuckled at his sides. The dog scratched and scratched at the bedroom door, drawing blood from its paws, but never once looked back at him. He whispered, "Stop." The house ignored him. I pushed against the walls with everything I had left. Awareness flared painfully bright. I remembered myself fully for a single perfect second. My name, my voice, my life before grief. I hurled that memory outward like a blade. The house recoiled. Cracks spidered along the ceiling plaster, raining down in choking clouds. Lights burst. The scratching faltered, breaking rhythm. 3 strokes became 2, then 1. The woman heard it. She ran toward the sound instead of away from it. Following the break-in pattern like a lifeline, she burst through the front door and slammed it shut behind her, collapsing against it, sobbing. The house screamed silently. Doors slammed. Hallways stretched and twisted, trying to disorient her. The folded blanket appeared and vanished in rapid flashes like a threat undecided. The man finally moved. He stepped between her and the stairs, heart hammering, confusion and horror warring across his face. He saw the scratches now, the blood, the way the dog shook in place, awaiting instruction. "What are you?" he demanded into the house itself. The house surged. Pressure slammed me flat, awareness shredding, scattering into sparks. I clung to one thought, and one thought only. "Open the door!" The woman screamed at him not to. The dog froze, ears flat. The scratching stopped. Silence crashed down heavy and absolute. The door handle turned slowly, not from the outside, from within the room. The house had chosen. I felt myself pulled hard toward the door, stretched thinner than ever before. This was the moment everything hinged on. The man hesitated, then he let go. He stepped back. "No," he said. The door rattled violently. The house howled in fury, shaking beams, splitting wood. The woman grabbed his arm, dragging him toward the exit. The dog whimpered, caught between commands. I pushed one last time, tearing free fragments of myself, embedding them deep into the frame. "Run," I whispered through splinters and dust. They ran. The door burst open behind them, releasing a roar of cold and sound and memory. But the threshold held just long enough. When they reached the yard, the house fell silent again. It did not chase. It waited. I was barely aware now. Stretched thin across the broken doorway. The house had been wounded but not destroyed. It never would be. But tonight it had been denied. That would matter. For a while, the house did not pursue them after that night. That was how I knew it was planning something worse. Days passed without incident. No scratching, no whispers, no folded blankets appearing where they should not be. The silence felt manufactured, stretched tight like skin pulled over a wound. The man and the woman stayed away, sleeping in their car, driving until exhaustion forced them to stop in well-lit places. Each time they woke, nothing followed them inside. They began to hope Hope is dangerous here. The house allowed it to grow. I felt the structure settle into a new configuration. Walls relaxed, corners softened. The house learned the shape of absence and prepared to fill it differently. It no longer needed proximity. It had gathered enough of them to work at a distance. On the fourth night, the woman dreamed of the house for the first time without fear. She walked its halls freely, sunlight spilling through windows that did not exist. The dog followed her calmly, no longer scratching, no longer waiting. When she woke, she felt rested for the first time in weeks. That was the trap. Memories began to slip back into place, rewritten gently. The man remembered the house as a place they had survived together. A test, something finished. He talked about returning just to check on it, just to close the door properly. He said unfinished things had a way of lingering. The woman resisted at first. Her dreams told her it was safe, that nothing waited there anymore. The contradiction wore her down. I tried to intervene. I rattled signs, bent reflections, sudden chills, but distance diluted me. My fragments embedded in the doorway could only stretch so far. Each mile they put between themselves and the house thinned my voice. When they crossed back into the neighborhood, the house greeted them warmly. Lights were on, curtains open, the porch clean and welcoming. No sense of wrongness at all. The dog lay on the step tail, wagging once in quiet recognition. The woman hesitated. The man did not. He stepped inside, calling her name, smiling relief flooding his face. Nothing happened. No scratching, no sounds. The house remained perfectly still. She followed. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. The air smelled clean, familiar, comforting, the kind of comfort that asks nothing in return. They slept that night in the living room together. The scratching returned just before dawn, not at the door, under the floor, soft, slow, directly beneath where they lay. The woman woke first, heart racing. She pressed her hand to the carpet and felt vibration like a pulse. The man stirred, mumbling her name, half dreaming. The house exhaled, floorboards bowed inward. The room tilted subtly. The scratching grew louder, closer now, rising through layers of wood and insulation. I gathered every remaining shard of myself and pushed upward. Remember, I screamed without sound. The woman bolted upright and screamed. The man froze, staring at the floor, understanding too late. The carpet split, darkness open. Hands, shapes, impressions pulled them down gently, insistently. The dog appeared at the edge, watching patiently, no longer scratching, no longer waiting. The house had adapted. It did not need doors anymore. When morning came, the living room was empty, the floor whole, no sign of struggle, just two impressions in the carpet slowly fading. And deep inside the structure, something settled comfortably into new spaces. I felt myself weaken further, nearly gone. The house had learned its final lesson. It did not need to chase. It only needed to wait. I am almost gone now. What remains of me is thin enough to pass unnoticed most nights. A pressure change, a pause in sound, a memory that refuses to fade completely. The house tolerates me because I no longer interfere. It has finished learning. The rooms are full again. Voices move through them that are not quite voices. Shapes settle into corners that were empty for so long. The house no longer strains or hunts. It rests. It has learned that patience is the sharpest tool it owns. The dog no longer scratches. That is how I know the cycle is complete. It lies curled near the bedroom door, now breathing slow and deep content in its purpose. It does not wait to be let in or out. There is no threshold left for it to test. The house opens where it wishes and closes when it is done. Sometimes people still visit. They comment on how peaceful the place feels, how warm, how welcoming. They say it feels lived in, loved. The house listens closely to those words and remembers them. I drift through familiar paths inside the walls, remembering when doors still mattered, when the scratching meant something specific, when I believed I could stop what was happening by understanding it. Understanding never stopped it. It only made the waiting worse. The house was never cruel. It was efficient. Grief taught it how to preserve what people leave behind when they break. It learned that loss softens edges and opens spaces. It learned that people will invite anything inside if it wears the shape of what they miss. The dog was only the beginning. It could have been anything. A voice, a smell, a habit, something small enough to feel safe and familiar, something that knocks instead of forces its way in. I wonder sometimes if anyone notices when the scratching stops. That should be the warning. When there is no sound at the door, it means the house no longer needs permission. It means it has already measured the space and decided how to fill it. I try once more to reach outward. A final ripple through wood and wire and dust. A reminder shaped like a thought that does not belong to you. If you hear scratching, do not open the door. If it stops, do not stay. I feel the house settle deeper, satisfied. New memories knit themselves into beams and floors. Laughter echoes softly from rooms that were once empty. The dog stretches and sleeps. There will be new nights, new people, new losses. The house will be ready, and somewhere inside it, something like me will always remain, counting the scratches, remembering when they meant you still had a choice. The house is quiet now. That is how it begins. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.